Good day, and welcome to Soft Skills, Strong Results, Practical Strategies for Managing Interpersonal Communication. I'm Charlie Krebs, and I'm your host. Today, we're going to discuss how to use soft skills in business conversation and in interaction. And that can be how you perceive soft skills in other people or how you use soft skills when you're interacting with other people. My guest today is Jason Cercone. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, Charlie. Glad to be here with you today, my friend.
Thank you. Jason is the founder and chief content officer of Bombtrack Media. Can you tell us a little bit about Bombtrack Media?
I would love to. So Bombtrack Media is really an amalgam of my 10 years of podcasting experience. And what I wanted to do is create a company that could help business owners and leaders and entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants really lean into the power of podcasting, but do it in a way that's much more efficient and really focuses on mindset, strategy, and getting the most from this content, because we live in a content-based world. There's so many things that are inundating people on a daily basis, from video clips and blogs and websites and emails and podcasts, you name it. What's beautiful about podcasting is that the content you create is very versatile, and it allows you to create a number of different assets from that recording. So my focus is helping businesses strengthen their marketing and their communication by leaning into podcasting and doing it in a very smart way.
Well, good. I know you've taught me a lot about podcasting. Like I said, I've never imagined being here and doing something like this, so it's been fun.
You've been a great student, Charlie, I have to say.
I've learned a lot.
You've leaned into it very well.
Well, since we're talking about soft skills, how do you define soft skills?
Well, for me, I look at, especially, when I look at podcasting, there's a lot of different mindsets that people have when they first come into this. And what I've learned in 10 years of podcasting is there are a lot of people out there spreading some terrible information around about what this is and how you can be successful. And from a newcomer that's never fully embodied or embraced or even sat down on a microphone to understand what it's about, it can be a little intimidating. So I know as a soft skill, I need to be very much with the kid gloves at first and just get an understanding of what people are doing and what business leaders are doing to market their business now. And how could podcasting potentially help that process and add a new layer to things? So for me, I'm very much into active listening. I think that's just natural with the podcaster in me, that the communication that I have, I feel that what I bring to the table helping a client out is understanding everything that they want to accomplish and then helping them put podcasting into that format versus the other way around. Because more than likely you've developed a process that works for you, but now you're just looking for a stronger way to utilize that process. Podcasting can fit into that seamlessly, but we have to understand how to make that work. So very much in the beginning, I'm curious. I'm utilizing my communication skills, my speaking skills, and my active listening skills to determine exactly what my client needs.
Well, in talking about active listening, what does someone do to be an active listener?
I think it's putting yourself in the moment and focusing on the conversation at hand and listening to what the person is actually saying versus what you need to say next. And I think we tend to do that. I mean, again, I relate a lot of this to what podcasters do. We're always thinking about that next question or that next thing we want to see. And sometimes that can throw off what could potentially be a great, like a backup question or a follow-up question to what somebody says, because we're more focused on what's on our sheet and on our format versus what we need to say to keep the conversation engaging. And when you think about the listener experience, which is what I've determined as the golden rule of podcasting, it may be unofficial, but listener experience is everything. You want people that find your podcast to be captivated by the content, to be engaged with it, and almost make them feel like they're in the room with you, part of that conversation. There's the old saying of, it sounds like a good podcast sounds like somebody's eavesdropping on a conversation at a coffee shop. I think that's a great thing. So if you can get people thinking in that mode, active listening is going to play a major role in that, because you're listening to what the person across the table from you is saying versus, okay, they said this, now I have to say this to make this conversation flow. So it flips the script a little bit, but ultimately it leads to a much better product for people to consume.
Well, a comparison that I can make between podcasting and acting is that when I coached actors for dozens of years, sometimes they would they'd get into their acting and they would do acting. And I would say, acting isn't about acting.
Yeah.
And my favorite quote about acting, it's living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. So you don't want the audience to sit there and go, wow, I am watching acting. And so by the same token, what I'm hearing you say is that podcasting isn't about podcasting. Podcasting is a vehicle to get a message to people.
That is about as accurate as you can get, Charlie. I think when people put themselves on this stage in their mind that this is a performance piece and they have to be on their game, they put pressure on themselves that doesn't need to be there. What you need to be focusing on is, what do you do every day? You talk to people. When you're talking to colleagues, you're talking to family members, you're talking to friends. You're not rehearsed, you're not scripted, you're not putting pressure on yourself to engage in that conversation. You're just being yourself and you're making a point. That's what this is, because in the moment, you and I are sitting here in the hopes is that millions of people hear our message someday, right? But in this moment, it's you and I talking. And you and I have done that several times in preparation for building into this podcast launch and all the great things that are coming from your new show. This to me is as natural as it gets. So now all we've done is just put a microphone in front of us and we're just continuing the conversation.
Well, you had said that earlier about active listening. And instead of going, okay, Jason, this is my next question, because then it sounds scripted and it sounds canned. But if I'm actually actively listening to you, then I'm hearing you say this and I'm hearing you say that. And then I can ask you a question based on those things.
Yeah, exactly. That to me, that's more natural. That feels like something that you didn't have to sit down and rehearse, or you didn't have to sit down and write down this list of questions that you're trying to get to, because a lot of times that can come off almost like an interrogation. Someone's listening to that and it's just question after question after question after question, and it just gets laborious. I was part of a guest appearance once where I thought it was going to be great because it was from a pretty well-known person. However, when I got to the recording session, it wasn't him hosting. And then the host asked me a question. I'd say my part and he would just go, great. And then ask the next question. That was the whole experience. He never engaged. He just said, great. And moved on. Couldn't care less if that would have ever went live because it was just so blah.
Well, and that doesn't validate people. One of the things I learned in teaching is that if I ask the students a question and somebody answers that question, I can say that was a good point. Because when I've watched people teach to do evaluations, sometimes people do exactly that. A student will say something, and then they'll go next, and that doesn't validate the person. So I remember our first meeting. You called it our VIP meeting?
Well, our first meeting was just having a cup of coffee to get to know one another.
Right.
But even then, I know that when we came into that, this is something, anytime I'm meeting with a new person that's looking to do podcasting, there are certain things that I'm looking for to see what natural abilities they already have that could translate to podcasting. Typically, having a good conversation is the first step, because all of the other skills that come along with podcasting, we're going to learn those and talk about those along the way. But if someone is a good conversationalist, I know they can take that to the podcast mic, because more than likely that skill is also being utilized with the customers they talk to, with the employees and colleagues that they talk to. That's an easy skill to translate. It's just understanding that once we remove that barrier of thinking this is a performance piece and you're talking to millions of people all at once, you can get more comfortable and just be yourself. So typically that's the first thing I'm looking at. And then from there, it's ultimately the why. And I'll ask everybody that on the front end of, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to start a podcast? And I want to hear, because that's going to be a different answer every time. And sometimes it makes complete sense why people are thinking podcasting will work for them. Others have very blown up perspectives of what can happen. Like, oh, well, I want to be like Joe Rogan. Well, why would you want to be like Joe Rogan? That's already taken. Be you. Be the first you. What can we do to make that work? And how will that look in this grand scheme of what you're trying to create and bring to the world? Joe Rogan's a great person to emulate. I watch his show to study how he talks to people all the time, but I know I'm never going to be him. And also, if it's the mindset of, well, the listenership he's gotten, the fame he's gotten, yeah, that's taken over 20 years. Buckle up. If that's the goal and that's the road you want to take, like these are things we need to think about. My whole thought process on podcasting is to think about all of the strategy and all of the communication that needs to take place on the front end, because oftentimes it doesn't get addressed until it's too late. Thinking about the long-term vision, thinking about what a person wants to accomplish, because once you're rolling and you start to see the work that's involved, you can lose focus if you don't have that North Star pointing you in the right direction. So I like to address all that up front.
So how does somebody, and not everybody's going to be a podcaster, but everybody ought to have a North Star.
Mm-hmm.
How do people know what their North Star is?
That's one of those questions that everyone has to answer for themselves. I can't tell you this is what you do, but what I can definitely say in regards to figuring out what your why is and what your purpose is to do something that is making you feel the emotion of crying if you don't accomplish it. You have to speak, you have to feel so strongly. And I'm absolutely ripping that off from Mr. Jim Shorkey. He had said this on a podcast that I had produced in the past, that if your why doesn't make you cry, it's not your why. And that's something to think about. That means a lot, because if it's something that if you were to fall short of accomplishing that goal, it would make you so emotional that it would completely wreck you. That's going to make you work harder. That's going to make you put in the reps to get better at what you're doing. And that to me that will develop the North Star that you need to succeed.
Why will it make you work harder?
If you're not that invested in accomplishing that goal that you've set yourself, you define this motive, this thing that you're doing as your why. I want to do this. I want to start this brand. I want to start this podcast. I want to start this YouTube channel. This is why I want to do it. This is why I feel I can make a difference in the world and I can communicate with the target audience that is going to hear my message. If I don't pull this off, if I don't keep working to accomplish this, it's going to make me bawl my head off. And I can feel that with Bombtrack Media. It's been, as we sit and talk, a little over a year, and I've been busting my ass every day trying to come up with new ways to develop and grow this brand. And I know there have been days where it was harder than others, but there have been days where the success has come and you can see that hard work start to pay off. But we live in a world where people want things immediately, and that hard work sometimes gets forgotten and sometimes never even experienced because people throw in the towel too fast. Podcasting is a prime example of that. People walk away from their shows way too soon. But if you develop the right strategy on the front end and understand the long-term vision of what you're creating, then you'll be invested in it and it will make you grab hold of that why and point to that North Star even stronger.
Well, you used a word that we hear a lot these days, and I just want to get your take on how do you define what a brand is?
For me, a brand is what other people are seeing of you and how when they see you, this is how they comprehend you. This is how they understand who you are. This is how they understand how you can help them accomplish a goal, solve a problem, be a part of their life. So I know we talked about this. I don't know if you want me to spoil things with your shirt, but we talked about this as we were coming out to the content house to record these podcasts today, or to record our conversation today. Your brand with your shirt is related to your TEDx talk. And to me, there's a lot of people that you see building that visual brand to where you see they're wearing a backwards hat. They're wearing that shirt. They're wearing that color. They always wear the same thing when they're in a public setting, and people can start to associate you with that brand. Whatever you can do to get burnt into the mind of somebody, that's how you're branding yourself. And that's how I define it. So you can absolutely build that with your podcast and think about with your show, how you're opening up the show, how you're closing down your show. You're throwing taglines in there that are going to be associated with you because they're unique to you. And you can start building your brand around things like that, around your shirt. There's a number of things that you can do with it. But for me, it's all about how people that find you are associating with you and understanding how you can help them.
You mentioned the first meeting that we had. When we were having that meeting, were there certain soft skills that you noticed in, or what do you look for in soft skills with somebody you're interviewing?
For me, I know that I would like to have little conversations first. Like if I was going into a setting to where, say you were going to be a guest on my podcast and it was the first time we've ever talked, I usually like to ask a couple simple questions before we ever press the record button, just to get to know a little bit about who you are. But as we talk, I'm understanding some little verbal and vocal cues. I can tell if maybe you're someone that interrupts. I can tell if this is something where you're soft spoken or you have a lot of energy, and it tells me how I need to guide that interview. And once I learn those skills, it makes it much easier for me because I know where I'm going to have to take certain left turns. I can tell you're okay. I asked one little question and you went on a 5-minute rant. Okay, I've got to control where this goes or else it could go very much off the reservation. So it's a lot of listening, like I said before, but it's something, it's just a skill that I've developed over a 10-year period in podcasting of just understanding the psychology of the person on the other side of the microphone. I know that I have something I want to accomplish by having them on my podcast. Likewise, they should have a goal in mind that they want to accomplish. If they're using podcast guesting as a strategy to build their brand, more than likely they're going on multiple shows and they're presenting who they are, what they do, and how they can help somebody solve a problem. But I want to make sure that they do that in a way that doesn't come off as salesy. I want them to be able to present their expertise and position themselves as a resource that could help my audience. That's up to me to steer that ship. I have to guide the conversation in a way that everybody looks good. So that's a skill that I don't think you can just pick that up in one episode or 2 episodes. You have to develop that skill set over time. So I'm talking like over thousands of episodes or over 1,000 episodes in one way, shape, or form I've been a part of. That's allowed me to develop a skill set to where I have that conversational skill with my guests, but then I can transfer that to other areas of my life. So how I talk to people in a one-on-one setting, like when we sat down for the first time, or how I communicate with family or friends. All of these skills that we develop here on the microphone can be transferred. And that's why it's another reason I love podcasting, because again, we talk about that versatility. So many skills that we utilize here can be used in other parts of our life.
Well, speaking of transferring skills, excuse me, not everybody is going to interview people to potentially do podcasts, but a lot of people that are listening right now interview people to hire. So if somebody's interviewing someone to hire, what can you teach them about how to perceive soft skills and what it says about that person?
That's a really good question. I think that you have to, when it comes to interviewing these days, I've been so removed from that world because I used to have to do that. And I think back on my time in doing that. A lot of times when I was interviewing somebody, I was thinking more about the personality that I was sitting with versus the actual skills, because I knew what we did at our company, I could teach them. That was my job. I was they're there to learn from me so I can train them so they can be a better salesperson, better whatever their job or whatever their role may be. So for me, I think thinking back on it, having never officially labeled it as such back then, a lot of it is active listening. It's listening to how that person is communicating with me, because if they are elaborating on their experience and telling me stories and things that have happened to them over the tenure of their career, I know they're going to be able to do that when they sit down with a customer. I know they're going to be able to do that when things might get a little bit difficult and they have to have a harder conversation with a customer where things might not go the way that we had anticipated. So having that active listening in play there works as well. I think having those strong communication skills and being willing to listen to what the other person has to say. It's a very divisive world. And as we sit and record, we're a week removed from the election. And that's usually the hardest time in our country because people are so divided on who they support. They can't hear the other side sometimes. And that I feel that we need to get back to a world where we can at least entertain the other ideas or the ideas of the other party so we can get some of that bipartisanship back. I hate that we have everything so divided because you see these conversations happen on Facebook. You see people are unfriending people because of who they voted for. I mean, really? That's the level we've gotten to? We can't sit down and actually hear. I can hear what you have to say. I can say my piece. Maybe we don't agree fully, but maybe there are things that we can come together on. That's what was the foundation of this country. It wasn't the division. And that translates to so much in our life.
So how do you do that? How do you teach somebody to listen to where I know I don't agree with you?
Turn off Facebook.
Right. But if I don't agree with you, my tendency is to shut you out, to unfriend you. So how do we teach people to not do that? How do we teach them how to listen and how to accept?
That's a major mindset shift that I don't think is going to just happen overnight. That's something you have to practice. And I think it comes down to understanding that everybody has their own way of living. And you have to look at things in a way that, how does this impact me directly? Everybody's going to have their own way. Everybody's going to have their own method of delivery and their opinions and their viewpoints. And you have to respect that because you have yours. And in a perfect world, everyone would respect what you have to say and vice versa. That way, at least if it's making you happy and you think about that, what's in it for me, you can still live your life and not be impacted in what the word of the day is or word of this time in life is triggered by what somebody else has to say. I think that's one of the big things social media has done, is it's put so much of that in our face that we've conditioned ourselves to offer up our opinion, whether it matches up with that person's or not. It's nice to have that platform, but when it gets overused and almost abused to an extent, it can lead to this divisiveness that we feel today. So you have to get to a point where you respect what other people have to say. If it doesn't align with you, it's not going to be the end of the world. Let them go about their business. You go about yours. You have to think about your life. What is this going to do for me? And how can I get to a point to where we can all, at least what I bring to the world has a positive vibe to it. I think if we can get there, that's going to be a great first step.
So some people are naturally good at soft skills and some people aren't. Why do you think that is?
I don't want to just say laziness, because that feels like the cop-out answer, but I think a lot of times it's just, what are you willing to learn? What are you willing to open up to in your life? I'll use podcasting as a prime example again. I know when I started 10 years ago, I didn't sound as good as I do now. My vocal skills weren't as good as they are now, and my listening skills weren't as good as I am now, or as good as they are now. And the reason why I feel they've developed is because I've taken the time to put in the reps. I've, over 10 years, focused on those things. Every time I get on a microphone, I want to think about the conversation that I'm having. I want to think about the skills that I'm putting into play. How can I do a little bit better each and every time? That's a mindset that should transcend podcasting and be applied to every part of life. What can I do to get 1% better at everything I'm doing each and every day?
Yes, it should transcend everything. But let's say you're an employer and I'm your employee.
Okay.
And I'm not good at soft skills. And I don't know enough to know that I'm not good at them. Instead of firing me, what can you do to help me get better? Are soft skills learnable?
I think they are. It's all about that communication and finding out from that person, what exactly is it going to take to reach you? What motivates you? And that's something that I had to learn from my years of management experience. Everybody is motivated by different things. A lot of people think that it's all about money. And some people, yeah, of course, you need the money to pay your rent and pay your mortgage and all those things. But that's not necessarily what motivates a person. Maybe a person gets out of bed just because they like to have a little bit of input in the overall production of what's happening at their job. Maybe they just want to be heard. They just want to feel like they're part of the team. Maybe that's what motivates them. But if you haven't tapped into that and you're just strictly saying, well, I've given them a job, I'm giving them a paycheck every week, so that should be enough, that's going to turn a person off, more than likely to a point where they start looking for other alternatives. And we live in a world now, I was talking about this with somebody last week, loyalty in regards to jobs is nowhere near what it used to be on both sides. People are not as willing to stay with a company long-term, and companies aren't willing to give people a long-term shot.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I really wish I would be able to answer something like that. I just think that everybody has, not everybody, that's too bold of they're too broad of a statement, but I think a lot of people have that grass is greener mentality, to where a company waves a number in their face, so they jump ship, not thinking about that long-term loyalty. And then they get on the other side and it's like, oh, this was not what I was expecting. Maybe the pay is a little bit better, but maybe that core philosophy or that core thing that feeds their emotion and keeps them invested in something, it's not aligning. And therefore they're trying to find, now they got to find another way out. And
well, I think one of the things that people want more than anything, more than pay, more than benefits, is I think people want to feel valued
and respected. Absolutely.
And I think people that are good at soft skills know how to value, know how to respect people. How do you show somebody that you feel you value them?
Well, Charlie, I think you can attest to this, because the way that I approach this with my clients is it's a process from the very beginning. Once we get started, I'm finding out exactly what you have in your mind right now, and we get all that down on paper. And then we sit down for a long session that I call a VIP day, and we go through all that information. But ultimately what we're laying out is every piece of the puzzle that it's going to require to get your podcast off the ground in a smart way. That requires a lot of communication and a lot of back and forth. And I make sure that anybody I'm working with understands that those lines of communication are open. Because if I'm not getting a full understanding of what you want to accomplish here, no matter what I do, I'm doing you a disservice. Because if I'm trying to do it in my own vision, that's not your vision. So therefore it's not going to align.
Well, and when we were interviewing, I would give you an answer and you kept saying, why? And I'd give you another answer and you'd say, why? And you were trying to drill down as to what I was really going for.
That was an old sales, it was like a module or something I learned. It was called peel the onion. And you just keep peeling and peeling and peeling because you're trying to get to the real root of the issue that's making a person feel pain or pleasure. And by doing that, maybe we don't have to go as deep as I used to in the past with jobs that I've had, but understanding more about, I think this, okay, why do you think that? Because there are things that you've probably done in your past that could relate to this platform that we're doing here with your podcast. But if I don't understand why you're thinking that, then it just sort of floats out there in the abyss. But if I ask that question, well, why do you feel that way? It allows me to get a better understanding. And then I can say, okay, yeah, that would work. Let's apply this. Or maybe that won't work. Or, oh, I've tried that before and this is what happened. And maybe that's a result that you were happy with. Maybe it's not. But you have to be willing to have those conversations and go deep. And for me, it's keeping those lines of communication open, because end of the day, I want you to have the product that you expected. And we're going to build and cultivate it and mold it into its exact form as we go. But if it's aligned in my vision and not yours, there's a major disconnect there.
So what do you think some of the most important soft skills are? And do they apply to both personal relationships and professional relationships?
I think they absolutely do. There's a lot of crossover there because, like I said, things that I would do professionally as a podcaster and professionally as a podcast consultant, I'm learning communication skills that I can apply to how I would talk to someone I might be dating or someone in my family or another colleague that does podcasting, and we can come together on some ideas. So that, to me, absorbing those skills there, 100%, there's a lot of crossover there. I think the ones that I always keep front of mind, because, and I feel like I'm almost a broken record with this, but I feel this strongly about it, is those listening skills and those verbal skills. Having the ability to understand what a person or how a person's feeling based on their body language, based on how they're verbalizing things. It translates a lot in the mic. I know a perfect example I think I can give you here is, we talked about this as we were coming to the studio today. When you do multiple podcast recordings, we call it batch recording, getting multiple episodes done in a single sitting. If you are able to keep that same energy level up for your last recording that you had for your first, then you're doing it right. You didn't overload yourself with too many episodes, because I've done in the past, the most I've ever done in one day was 8 interviews. And I kept my energy level up because I knew in my mind, if I didn't do that, I was doing a disservice to the person at the end of the line. They didn't ask to be at the end of the line. That was just how the schedule fell. Why am I giving them less of me because I tried to get things done in a faster manner? If you can keep that same energy level up, then you are doing things right. And that's what it's all about. You can be efficient, but you have to keep your level of dedication as strong throughout the entire process. And there are a lot of times where that might, sometimes people, at the end of a day, sometimes at your last meeting of the day, I just don't want to do this. And then the person shows up like, hey, okay, well, we're going to do this. And you're just not bringing your full effort to the table. That can be felt. If you're doing that in this environment, if you were to come into your 5th recording or your 6th recording and you were just sluggish and you weren't feeling that same energy level, your listener is going to hear that and they're going to experience that. And they're going to wonder, well, why doesn't he have the power or the energy that he had when I listened to that last episode?
So what are some of the things that they're feeling? I mean, I can have all the great words in the world, but what is it that you sense, or what do you think they sense, that they can feel that something's different?
I think there's a lot of pressure sometimes. I think that just putting themselves in that position where they feel like they have to perform, that can throw things off. I think overall, it's just not having a full grasp of your message. And if you try to shotgun content, you try to throw things out there, you're trying to make sense of things on the fly, that can put you in a very awkward position too. And ultimately, it's just not presenting yourself in a way that's going to make people relate to you. And that's really what you're trying to do as you develop a brand, as you develop a podcast. You want people to hear your voice. You want them to engage with what you have to say, ultimately taking the next step. And if you feel that or if you listen to a person that has a message and a story to tell and you feel that you can relate to that, more than likely they're going to help you get from point A to point B with whatever issue it is that you're facing. That's the name of the game. So sometimes not having your full presence in the moment can throw things out of whack completely.
Well, you talk about relating with people. And one of the things where I think soft skills come in is in our ability to connect with people. So, so what does relate mean to you? Why do we relate with some people and not with others?
Well, I think that you just nailed the key point. I was going to say, you can't relate with everybody. I think that's impossible. It's so hard to try to please everybody. And that's where, we live in a world where we're very guided by the feedback that we get on content that we put out. Many people get discouraged because they didn't get a lot of likes on a post, or they didn't get a lot of listens to a certain episode of their podcast. And when that happens, they kind of go, oh man, I'm not doing something right. But what you have to realize is it takes time for the right people that relate to your message to find you. And when they start to find you and they start to migrate in and you start to see that snowball slowly roll downhill, you realize that you're relating to the right people. You don't have to relate to the masses, because no matter how hard you try, that's not going to happen. Even if you have a piece of viral content, say something does catch on and goes wild across the internet, you're going to see people sprinkled into that, and they're commenting just to tell you they don't like it. So you didn't relate with them. They're just commenting to tell you they hated it. That's the world we live in. We get a lot of praise, and we'll have that one person that says they don't like it. And where do we fixate? We fixate on the negative. And that's where we have to shift our mindset and shift our focus and start thinking about the positive first. And I've got all these people that are liking what I have to say. They're telling me so in the comments, through text, through word of mouth, whatever. But that one person that doesn't like what we're doing, that's okay. I finally got my first 1-star review on my podcast a couple weeks ago. I was like, finally someone's listening to this and didn't like it. Because I know I'm not perfect. And I'm just looking at 5 stars across the board. I'm like, this can't be right. There's got to be somebody that listens to this and doesn't resonate. And it's okay that doesn't happen. Just embrace it and develop some thick skin. And then just put your focus on the people that you can relate to.
When you talk about positivity, I think positivity is a very important soft skill. So we all know people that aren't positive, and it's more of a habit than anything. They probably don't even know that they're not positive. If somebody that you're working with is not positive, can they learn to be positive?
It's another one of those things that I don't think happens overnight. I think people are just so naturally conditioned to do what they're used to. You look at the people that just constantly spread negativity across social media, or come to work and you're like, hey, good morning, Charlie. How you doing? I'm fine. You just know that they're dragging whatever happened the night before, whatever happened on the morning commute into work with them that day. And that it sets the tone for the rest of the day. But if you can start looking for the positive in every situation that you're in, it's an exercise that makes you think so much clearly. It feels so much better, but it takes a minute, because we're conditioned, and pretty much at an early age, because we hear the word no so much, we constantly drift towards the negative before looking at the positive. Listen, even in my later years here, as I've hit mid-40s, I'm much better at this now of, okay, what was the positiveness? This totally sucked. This outcome was terrible, but what's the positive that I can draw from it? I've gotten better at it, but there's still times where I'll catch myself and have to say, no, you got to shift how you're thinking about this. So it's a willingness for the person to accept that and to start thinking differently. And it's an exercise that I think for a lot of people, it will feel forced. But once you get in a habit of thinking positively first, boy, it brings a much brighter outlook to your day. It just feels better to get out of bed in the morning and you're not miserable.
Right.
There's a lot in that. But yeah, believe me, we're all going to face some crappy times in our life from time to time. But focusing on the positives first and finding, even in the crappy situation, that's probably the true test. If you can pull a positive out of even the worst, most awful situation, you're doing something right.
Well, and you talk about thinking differently. And while a lot of people may not know too much about soft skills, it's definitely something we can learn. It's not rocket science.
Right.
So we can all learn how to think differently. We can all learn to nurture our soft skills and nurture our ability to interact with other people. So
yeah,
Jason, it's been great having you here.
Charlie,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for coming today.
You bet.
If people are interested in learning more about Bombtrack Media, where would they go?
All they need to do is go to bombtrackmedia.com. It's super easy, but you can connect with me in a number of different ways there, and you can check out my podcast, Let's Blow This Up. And I hope to have you as a listener and look forward to connecting with anybody that wants to hear more about podcasting.
Well, great. Well, thank you again for being here. And thank you to all of you for joining us today on Soft Skills, Strong Results. I'm Charlie Krebs. And remember, soft skills are the human side of success. Have a great day.